AV Shop Talk, Episode 3.
Podcasting from Boston, Massachusetts and Los Angeles, California, this is AV Shop Talk. Covering the latest audiovisual trends and emerging technologies, this is where the AV pros come to talk shop. With your hosts, Nate Schlechter and Jason Griffin.
Hello and welcome to Episode 3. I am your host, Nate Schlechter, here with my colleague, Jason. How you doing over there, Jason?
I'm good, Nate. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain. Got a little bit of a cold, but I am...
It's going around.
Yeah, it's just that time of year.
Yeah, indeed.
But that will not stop us from talking about technology and talking
shop. The show must go on.
Exactly.
I'm excited to sit down tonight and record this episode. We had the opportunity to sit down with Greg Schlechter. He's one of the board members at the AVnu Alliance, and he works for Intel. And it was a very interesting conversation. Learned a lot about AVB, and looking forward to passing that knowledge along.
Yeah, definitely. And when did we record this episode? It was, recorded back in October, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, this was recorded in mid-October.
Yeah, 2013. So we've got a few interviews we've done back then, but it's still relevant information. The technology is developing. If you listen to last episode, you heard us talking about HD-based T, and this week we're gonna talk shop about audio-video bridging.
Yeah. I thought it was a very interesting conversation. Greg is heavily involved in the effort by the AVnu Alliance to push this technology downstream into consumer and residential applications. So obviously, as being a residential integrator, I found that aspect of the conversation was really interesting.
Yeah.
And also, go ahead.
And the whole wireless thing too. That really wasn't on my radar.
Yeah. The
fact that AVB can be a wired connection or a wireless connection, and that it's big in auto. So, like BMW is adopting it or becoming a partner, and I think there's a couple other big car manufacturers that are looking to jump on board to use AVB for car audio, which it's where a lot of the guys in home automation, residential, commercial, a lot of us got our start in car audio. So it's kind of neat to see that connection. Yeah,
that's very true, and I'm with you. I surprisingly hadn't thought much about AVB as a wireless technology, and once he said it, it makes perfect sense. And I also thought that it helps kind of drive the point home about, there's a lot of conversation going on in our industry right now, sort of comparing AVB and HD-based T, how they're similar, how they're different, where they're competing, where they're not competing. And I actually thought that the discussion about AVB as a wireless technology really drove home how the two technologies are different. HD-based T is very much about transporting the signals on the wire, and AVB is actually just basically a set of routing protocols. So I thought that was interesting.
Right, and the way to think about AVB is as an Ethernet upgrade, and it's what it's doing is adding time code or sync information, so that packets of data can be prioritized based on whether or not they need to be in sync with other streams. So it's really kind of a different type of technology, whereas HD-based T is a proprietary product that is licensed. AVB is a set of IEEE standards that is represented by the AVnu Alliance, which is an industry forum. And it's an open standard that anyone can use, whereas HD-based T is, you got to go through them to use it.
Yeah, exactly. All very good points, and it was definitely great to sit down with somebody who's involved with the Alliance and kind of talk that over.
Yeah, so without any further ado, why don't we get to the AV Shop Talk with Greg.
AV Shop Talk.
You work for Intel, and I know you're involved with the AVnu Alliance or AVB at some level, But could you maybe fill that out for us as to what your role is and how you are involved with AVB?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, yeah, my job is with Intel, and that's my main job, and I work on various media initiatives here at Intel. But Intel is one of the founding members of AVnu Alliance, which is the alliance that's kind of promoting and doing certification for AVB. And Intel's I'm one or two people who serve as board members for Intel in AVnu, and I'm also pretty active in the marketing work group side of AVnu, specifically trying to move this into consumer residential, because that's where we see a lot of the interest in that space. And I'll talk a little bit more about, you guys already know the different applications of AVB and AVnu in the different segments.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you brought up residential, because that's definitely one of my questions that I had on my list to kind of pick your brain about. But I think, what we're going for and what we're hoping to achieve from this interview is kind of a big picture. We're interested in, obviously learning more about the technology and specifically the future of AVB and how it will affect the commercial and residential AV integration industry, as well as, everyday consumers. I don't know if maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I can I can speak to as much as my crystal ball will tell me, but I have some ideas on how my crystal ball is only as foggy or as clear as most people's. But we can definitely talk about it. I think that I don't know where you guys want to start. Is, I guess, you guys have, it sounds like you guys have a pretty good background on AVB and what it sort of does, or where do you guys want to start?
Yeah, that's probably a good place just to start. Because I know people listening to this may not know, or they might be confused, or they may have heard different things. But, as far as I know, AVB is a set of IEEE 802.1 standards. I think there's 4 standards altogether, and then there's maybe 2 other standards, the 1722 and 1733, that also rely on 802.1. But other than that, and really getting into what these different standards do and how it all works, it's a little bit over my head. I know it has to do. I know it has to do with time-sensitive data packets and making sure that audio and video data takes priority over downloading, an email attachment or something like that.
Got it. Yeah. You're that's pretty much right on. So the background is AVB, as you said, what came out of the IEEE, and a lot of companies, and a lot of them kind of more in the commercial application space, saw this basic need going forward that networks have a lot of inherent advantage for distributing audio and video, but there's a few things that lacks to do it really well. And the main thing, as you said, is time sensitivity. And that's not just getting the package to there at a certain time. There's there's things that happen, but it's also not just getting the packets there, but time synchronization across all the nodes of the network. You have lots of different endpoints rendering audio and video, but as you guys know, for audio, it's very important that all those clocks are rendering at the same time and rate, because audio is very sensitive to time. So it's not just getting the packets there, it's having a common time base across a very large network.
Yeah, and that kind of resonates with me too, coming from a background of I studied sound recording technology, and so having a master clock and master time code, and having all your gear syncing up properly within the recording studio, I get that. That makes sense. We're just transferring that same concept to an Ethernet network.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, Greg, I had a question to follow up on that. It's easy for me to see the importance of that really tight time synchronization across, say, a large venue that has tons of speakers in miles virtually of cable. I'd actually be curious to know if you could elaborate a little bit on how you think this technology, like you mentioned in the residential market, where this need will kind of come into play for residential integrators, and how, as a residential integrator, will AVB make my life easier?
Yeah, good question. So in the residential space, I'll start off by saying, you still have the same problem. You're trying to distribute audio, video to the multiple points, and they have to be a lot of times synchronized. If you're doing that by network, you have to have that time sensitivity. An example where I think this is taking off quite a bit in consumer, and where I think might be the first place that people are really asking for this, if you look at in wireless audio. So you see solutions like Sonos, for example, and recently you saw Samsung and Bose come out with these wireless audio distribution systems. And if you look at what they had to do, they had to modify Wi-Fi or do some of their own things to do time synchronization because they wanted to get a product out. So they had to solve the time synchronization problem on their own. The problem that comes up with is now they're kind of an island, right? A Sonos speaker won't work with a Bose, and a Bose won't work with a Sonos. So obviously it would be nice to have the time synchronization as a common across the network that everyone could use. And then, my analogy I always say from a consumer residential is, before we have network speakers or wireless speakers, distribution was done over, over speaker wire, right? And speaker wire was common, for a reason, it was a common interface. You could buy an amplifier from one company, this speaker from another company, speakers over here for another company. And the way you hook them up was pretty much common. They would work together. But I think the network should be the same. If we're distributing by a network, it should be the same as far as having a standard for these devices to sync up and send audio and video around. So that's kind of where I see the real value of this in the residential area. But I'm curious what you think, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, does that ring true
that's,
with you? Is it, yeah.
It's great. I think it's a great answer. I really think that your use of Sonos as a comparison is a great answer. And I'm glad you brought it up, because a lot of the talk about AVB and similar technologies like HD-based T, for instance, the focus is heavily with the type of wire that it uses and how the technologies are similar and different on the wire. But I think that a lot of people kind of forget that AVB is also a wireless technology, because at the end of the day, we're talking about, standard Ethernet protocols here. So I think that was a great analogy, and that actually really helped me kind of understand how it'll be important for residential. So hopefully it helps others as well.
Yeah, and you bring up just to put a point on that, it's good to be able to do it on wireless. It's good to be able to do it on wired, and it's even better if you can do across both of those seamlessly, which is
exactly
you can do, right? So
that's
another value.
That's funny that you mentioned wireless, because as someone who might be speccing systems and designing systems, I think I personally might be very hesitant to really put some crucial information, on a Wi-Fi type of situation. Just based on, that some of the packets are probably not going to make it from point A to point B. Is wireless AVB going to be is it going to be reliable, just as reliable as copper?
Well, as long as you're going to, AVB is not going to solve a bad wireless connection, right? If you have two devices with 10 walls behind them and you don't have any connection as well, AVB is not going to solve that problem, right? You still have to have a wireless link.
It's an RF issue, right, at that point.
Exactly. So, AVB is going to give you time synchronization. If you have over there, maybe you can use it to have a little bit more data on how good that connection is. But it's not meant to, it's not going to solve and make wireless networks just work across miles when you wouldn't make before, right?
Right.
And that's it's going to be whatever medium you're using and how good that is. It's just adding synchronization. And to your point, I think and that's why I go back to, I think the value here is use the medium that makes sense to get it there. So if you need to do wired for a bunch of the house, but you got a few things that you're just trying to get out to that other room or something like that, then and you just need to get it there, and you can do it. It's reasonable wireless. Then you can have that mixed network and make that work. In full, that's for the residential or install. I think that's what you're kind of talking about. In consumer, you see a strong, and Sonos is a great example. This is a strong desire for consumers to very easily, just take these things, plug it in. I have outlets everywhere, and that's kind of the system I start setting up. And so from that standpoint, I think, there's a strong need for wireless there. But I agree with you. I I've never been one to say the whole world is going to go wired. There's a lot of reasons you should put wired in here. I have a wired multi-room audio system in my home, by the way, and You know, but sometimes it's not possible, right? So
I mean, one of the other hats I wear is I'm a live sound person, so I could definitely see, you know, coming home in my personal, you know, if I ever had a personal surround sound set up in my house, it might be convenient to go wireless there where it's not mission critical. But, you know, if I'm running live sound, I probably want to, you know, stick to the copper. So I think that's a good distinction to make. It's great to have the option, but just knowing, you know, when to deploy what technology is going to be important.
And then this goes back to what I didn't talk about, is why we've not said that AVB is the same application to every market segment, right? So we have AVB, we started with Pro Audio, and that's all wired. I mean, all the demand in Pro Audio live sound, like you said, that's all wired Ethernet for the reasons you talked about. Mm-hmm. Now, there's talk about maybe eventually some wireless microphones and some pieces, but a lot of it's wired in that space, and that's what the existing, a lot of the products today are based in that Pro Audio space. And then the next one that's happening a lot is in automotive. I don't know if you're aware of that, is basically utilizing an Ethernet backbone in the car to not only distribute the audio video we see in our car, but also sensors and cameras that are all moving around data back to there. So converting that to an Ethernet backbone and then having the time sensitivity, that's a lot of stuff happening on that side in automotive. And then the other segment, like what we're talking about now, is, okay, how can this apply to more residential consumer space? And that's just starting. So,
yeah. No, Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask one more question about residential, and then maybe we can move on with some of the higher level, you know, broader concepts. But do you envision AVB as kind of being, I guess, almost a household name someday? Like when you go buy a router, will it have that stamp right on the box that says AVB? And do you think maybe not the end users per se, but that AVB feature will be something that more tech savvy and integrators know about and look for on out of the box products?
I definitely don't think it'll ever be a consumer name. You know, consumers aren't going to look for AVB. They may know, maybe there will be something along with Wi-Fi and Ethernet or DLNA or something else that says it includes this from an in consumer standpoint. I actually think what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of awareness, and if we look way down the time, we'll go to a time where we don't even have to think about this. You know, the idea that a network was not time sensitive is a crazy thought. Just like today, we think other network topologies are like, you know, whoa, there was some time you didn't have VLANs, you know. So, so you know, I think at some point it becomes the network just does this, but in the meantime, in the time between, and that's what AVnu is also doing. Talking about the alliance. The AVnu Alliance are part of what our job is. We always say, you know, we're kind of like what Wi-Fi was, Wi-Fi Alliance to 802.11b, et cetera. I don't know if you remember when those things came out. For a while, it was, you know, if you bought a 802.11 at that time B, G card, it would work with the same manufacturer's AP for sure, but you weren't sure working at a different manufacturer, and there's a lot of alphabet soup to the consumer. Wi-Fi Alliance said, okay, look, we're going to certify it so that we know that it works together, and it gave a name at least to some of those. And I think it would be more likely it may be AVnu or some sort of a trade, you know, more of a consumer-friendly name. AVB really, although it's, you know, it's taken off a lot of people in the, especially pro audio industry because it's come out of that, is well known. But I don't think it'll be a in consumer brand or name, if that was you're asking.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I think there is some confusion, you know, from people I've talked to and just different articles I've read, you know, kind of comparing AVB to HD-based-T, and it's really, you know, from what I understand, comparing apples to oranges. I mean, you've got an industry alliance, an industry forum that is coming up with IEEE standards. It's not a product in and of itself, but it's a technology that will be included in multiple products. And I think you put it very, very clearly when you mentioned, you can buy a speaker and you can buy speaker cable, and it doesn't have to be made by the same company. You can mix and match. And so I think that really helps bring home the point of what you guys are after with AVB, and making sure that all these new products that are AVB compliant work well together, and you can mix and match and have that freedom to do different things. So I appreciate that explanation there, Greg.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. As we start out saying, I work for Intel. I'm not here selling you an Intel product. It's a bunch. This is a lot of companies come together in the IEEE and in these meetings because we just want to agree on how our products work together, right? We're not trying to sell a technology. We said, hey, this is the way these things should talk together and work together, and we should have some way to certify it. We're not selling a technology or a chip or a product, right? And sometimes that's a little hard for some of these industries where we don't. In IT, in my industry, we do this a lot because of the volumes involved. I mean, PCI, USB, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Some of these other industries, maybe it's not as aware of these type of alliances and the IEEE and how it works. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and to continue further down this road, there's a product offered by a company called Audinate, and it's called Dante. And if you're just looking at it at face value, people might be confused between Dante and AVB. Are they one and the same? Are they in competition? Do they work together? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dante. It sounds like you are. But how do those two technologies work together? I mean, what effect will AVB have on a product like Dante, if any?
I would ask that of Audinate, and I do. Well, they actually have offices here in Portland, and I know I think what I know of, they're members of. That's a great example of they're members of the alliance, and I believe they publicly said that Dante is sort of their solution brand, and they will eventually utilize AVB or AVnu as part of their solution. So again, it's kind of like another apples and oranges to say those are competing, especially since one's adopted. I mean, just to not focus on that. I mean, do you guys remember a product or technology called NetStreams many years ago, or that company? Mm-hmm. And then they were eventually bought by Clear One. They had a technology that did sound sort of like we did. They had a proprietary way of synchronization. And now they're also a member of the alliance, and they've said they're going to do things on AVB. So, just because people had some other way of doing this doesn't mean that they're competing with this, especially since they're members of the alliance. They've said, hey, maybe we just need to all figure out how to do this. And I think that's the natural way a lot of industries go, where people solve these problems for certain niche applications. And then as it grows and more devices need to connect, they say, all right, let's just agree on how this happens so we can interconnect like that with speaker wire. And I think that's the evolution we're seeing happen.
Right. Because
I was just going to say, you could, going back to our other example, I think you'll probably see, I would hope, as a consumer, the same thing on the consumer side. We're talking about a couple brands that all have done this on their own, but they're their own islands and don't work across manufacturers. I would hope that the same thing happens there as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of comparisons and kind of comparing different technologies, Nate touched on it briefly, but I'd love if you could chime in a little bit. I've seen a few articles come across different trade publications and blogs that they tend to compare AVB to HD-base-T, and I've seen some that declare HD-base-T a winner in some battle that they've envisioned, and I sort of intuitively understand how the two of them are different. But I think it would be insightful if you could talk a little bit about that, and maybe even if you could kind of give us a hypothetical situation of how the two technologies might even exist side by side in the same installation.
Yeah, I'd happily do that. I'm curious what your thought is, just out of curiosity from outside looking at those articles, what your thought is and how they're different. And then
I see HD-base-T as more of a transport level. I'm not an IT expert, so the OSI model kind of eludes me a little bit, but I see it as more of a technology that is about putting all of this stuff on the wire and transport technology, whereas I see AVB as more of a routing and kind of traffic directing almost, and just sort of enhancing current network technology to make it better at handling audio-visual streams. So I guess HDBaseT may be a little bit more proprietary, and AVB as kind of an open standard that improves upon existing standards.
Yeah. Even besides it being open or not open standard, I think you're right. HDBaseT is pretty simple. If you look at it's a very cool thing they've done. They've taken protocols that prior to this didn't really lend to, I guess, category cable. They have HDMI, USB, and I think a couple others, and they've adapted that to go over category cable. It's that simple, but it's obviously very useful, especially in the residential space where you're trying to, do long runs and switch between those and do that. And by the way, it also one of those protocols it supports is Ethernet. And so as you said, all we're doing is improving Ethernet or Wi-Fi, if you will, and adding that capable network. If HDBaseT wanted to continue Ethernet and they wanted to add AVB to that Ethernet link, they could do that. So, I agree. It's completely apples to oranges, as saying they're competing. I mean, maybe they both do audio video, and they may both use a category cable, but that's like saying speaker wire competes with an RCA cable, kind of, right? In a way. Mm-hmm. So that's the simple. And I mean, one of the obvious things we talked about is obviously HDBaseT is never meant to be a wireless medium. So for wireless transport, there's I don't think they're competing in that space. And I've actually talked to the HDBaseT guys. I think we both agree as far from our discussions about this. I mean, I could see parts of a large building. Maybe there's some backbone that's done all Ethernet because HDBaseT can only go so far, and then maybe within some small rooms they use HDBaseT for some short range links. In residential, you may do HDBaseT because it's just useful to have HDMI with so many things supporting it. But then you may peel the audio off and go using something else or using wireless or on that space. But as you guys from your background know as integrators, these are all tools that do different things. It's not making them into some sort of which one's going to be the grand winner of carrying AV is probably not the right conversation to have.
I agree.
You mentioned about the crystal ball. Do you have a crystal ball over there you can peer into and tell us, what's coming down the pike in terms of AVB technology? Are there any big manufacturers that are jumping on board with the AVnu Alliance, or any big products coming down? What should we be looking for?
This goes back to what we do, right? Our job is our product, as from an AVnu Alliance, is the certifications. So we don't really talk about what products manufacturers are doing. What I can tell you is what we are working on, and we talked about, is the different segments, which is a focus right now is going towards a certification for wireless and residential, so like we have in Pro Audio for wired. And we're looking through. We have kind of put together marketing requirements, and then we go from marketing requirements to these are the things that we think we need for interoperability, and here's how we do a certification program. Likely work with Wi-Fi Alliance if we go the Wi-Fi route. So again, our product is this: how do we certify this to work together? So I think that's the crystal ball, what we're working on in that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're providing, if I'm hearing this correctly, you're providing basically a path, or i.e. certification for manufacturers to jump on board, and you're kind of spelling that out for them, and letting them know what they need to do to incorporate this into what they're making.
Exactly. Gotcha. And we seem to have quite a bit of interest. Again, we talked about wireless as being not useful for everything, especially in obviously not live sound, but in the residential consumer space, there seems to be an incredible amount of interest around wireless right now.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. I think that's great. I'm really glad you brought that up. And Sonos is a hugely popular product that I've worked extensively with. So I think that's a great analogy and a great place for you guys to focus on.
Sounds good. Yeah, and love to get you guys other thoughts, offline or whatever, on application space. We had a really good. One of our first kind of we brought just 5 or 6 integrators of CEDIA, kind of brought them in a round table and had some really great discussion with them on spaces, and they were really excited about this. I mean, one of the things that they brought up I didn't think about was they said, hey, we love this because we have all these great tools for Wi-Fi and networks that they've learning to use and they can do for open networks that they can't use on some of these other protocols. I mean, I think they mentioned like Sonos. They said, well, once, I mean, I was curious if you have the same thing. Like, hey, if Sonos isn't working, we don't know what to do. If it's a Wi-Fi network, we can go diagnose it, right? So,
right. Yeah. I also really like to hear the fact that you guys are actively pursuing integrators' opinions and going out and seeking that feedback from the people that are actually working with your technology, because I know that's a common sort of gripe that people in the industry have, is that the manufacturers, and I know you guys aren't a manufacturer per se, but just that manufacturers don't always listen to us, and we do have valuable opinions about how the technology should develop. So I think that's great that you guys are being proactive about that.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's obvious to us. You guys are the ones daily installing, and to think that there's one topology and even a commercial or a residential is crazy, of course. And so you guys have this knowledge of the many different things that you guys face, and that's valuable knowledge.
Great. Well, it was great chatting with you, Greg. We really appreciate your time and answering our questions, and we'll have to keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been great.
All right. Thanks so much, Greg, for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Well, that about does it for this AV Shop Talk. Very glad to have talked to Greg Schlechter there from Intel and the AVnu Alliance. And I thought that was very informative. I'm really glad he was able to give us some time there, answer some of our questions, and even ask for our feedback. That was pretty cool.
That was very cool. Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a really enjoyable and informative conversation. So I appreciate Greg taking the time to come on and join us.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to talking with him again after I have some time to bang my head against the wall and suggest some good applications.
Yeah. I thought it was really cool that he, specifically pointed that out, that the AVnu Alliance is open to suggestions, and they want to hear back from integrators and hear our feedback and different applications that we might want to use the technology for. And you often hear integrators and people in the industry in general, gripe and complain that manufacturers and big companies aren't listening to us. So it was cool to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. He had a great attitude towards integrators and trying to get good feedback so that they can make their product. We should talk about what their product actually is.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Jason, what is the product? What's the takeaway from this interview?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, towards the end of the conversation, he made mention, and I think I may be paraphrasing here, but essentially he said our product is certifications, and I thought that was interesting because we keep kind of touching on AVB versus HD-based-T and how the two are the same and how the two are different, how they compete. And I thought that was an enlightening point because, when you look at HD-based-T and you look at Valens, their product is a chip. They're selling you a chipset. The AVnu Alliance and AVB, what they're actually selling, their product is, in fact, just the certification. So I thought that was interesting.
Right, and it's an industry forum. It's not a company that's trying to sell their product for a profit necessarily. It's an industry forum. It's a different nature. So a set of IEEE standards, an Ethernet upgrade, if you will.
Yeah, I think their mentality is a rising tide raises all ships, and like you said, they're not just selling a product, but they just see an existing technology and an application for that technology, and more specifically a way to make it better. So I think their mission is noble.
It sounds like what they're trying to do is get manufacturers on board with their product or their certifications, and get everybody on the same page so that when you buy a router or some sort of internet appliance, it's going to have this stuff built into it.
Right.
And it's just going to be there in the background.
Yeah, I think a big mission for them right now is just going to be building more general awareness amongst not only professionals, but maybe manufacturers, as well as possibly even the general public. And Greg talked a lot about wireless, and I again thought that it was interesting that the conversation went there. I hadn't really anticipated that coming into it, but it seems to be a big push for AVB as they try to get more into the consumer residential space.
And if you want to learn more about the AVnu Alliance and AVB, you can definitely check out avnu.org, avnu.org, or look them up on Twitter at AVnu_Alliance.
All right, very good. So that'll do it for this episode of AV Shop Talk. Thank you, all you AV tweeps out there, for listening. And if you want to learn more about us, check us out on Twitter at AV Shop Talk, or come visit us at avshoptalk.com. Take care.
AV Shop Talk is produced independently by Nate Schneider and Jason Griffin, with musical contributions from Colin Owens. His latest album, Trinity, was released in December of 2013. Voiceover talent came from John Perry. When he's not behind a microphone, he's working on the truck. See what he's been up to at johnsoldtruck.com.
AV Shop Talk.